Times of war inevitably heighten arguments on how far the United States government should be able to go when infringing upon its citizens' liberties. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution grants us freedom of speech, petition, press, assembly, and religion. But to what extent? The story of Clement Vallandigham's political career during the United States Civil War is interesting for this very reason, as it gives us a real-life example of where the government, despite granting us certain liberties, should be constantly put in check by the consent of the government as to avoid any infringement upon our rights. Clement Vallandigham was arguably the most prominent member of the Copperhead movement during the Civil War. Copperheads were Democrat members of the Union who insisted bringing the war to an end as quickly as possible and making peace with the South. Clement Vallandigham was a politician who operated in the state of Ohio. During his political career, he had a seat on the Ohio House of Representatives for 2 terms. He would run for the federal House of Representatives, but would lose 2 elections, only winning the 3rd due to a vote recount excluding black votes. He won re-election twice until 1862, when he would lose his seat in Congress due to being gerrymandered out of votes. From here, Vallandigham would attempt to run for governor in Ohio. Clement Vallandigham was a very outspoken individual, especially on the topic of the Civil War. In many speeches throughout the Civil War, Clement insisted that the North end the conflict with the South. Now this on the surface was in of itself a pretty admirable stance. The Civil War was in fact the deadliest war ever in American history. The problem with Clement's views was that the outcome he desired after the North and South made peace. Clement's proposal was that if the war were going to come to a peace, that the United States would have to break up into 4 other macro states in the North, South, Midwest, and Pacific regions. Each of these macro states would effectively have their own president for a term of 6 years. This idea of breaking up the United States but still keeping the states under a larger federal government most likely stemmed from 2 of Clement's beliefs. One being that there were 4 distinct regions of America with different cultures and customs, and the second being the fact that half the country was pro-slavery while the other was abolitionist. This was a problematic solution because it was essentially telling the North, hey, you know, this whole slavery idea that we're going to a war over, yeah, it might be a big deal to you guys up there, but to the South, that's just how the world really works. So the solution is just you do you and let the South do them, despite how messed up the Confederate ideology actually is. So as we covered earlier, Vallandigham did not like the war, and he also did not like the president either. He was very outspoken against Lincoln and his war. He blamed Lincoln for the war. In his speeches against the war, Clement encouraged men to not enlist in the army. He called on those who were in the army to desert their stations. At the same time this was happening, however, General Burnside, one of Lincoln's generals he had throughout the years, had recently issued General Order 38, which stated, "The habit of declaring sympathies for the enemy will no longer be tolerated in the department. Persons committing such offenses will at once be arrested with a view to being tried as above stated, or sent beyond our lines into the lines of their friends." Many historians conclude that Burnside had actually passed the order in order to arrest Clement for speaking out against the army in the draft. In fact, less than a month after the order was issued, Clement was arrested on May 5th, 1863. This arrest was addressed by Lincoln, in which he said, "Mr. Vallandigham avows his hostility to the war on the part of the Union, and his arrest was made because he was laboring with some effect to prevent the raising of troops, to encourage desertions from the army, and to leave the rebellion without an adequate military force to suppress it." He was not arrested because he was damaging the political prospects of the administration or the personal interests of the commanding general, but because he was damaging the army upon the existence and vigor of which the life of the nation depends. Now thinking back to the beginning of the video, you might think, hey, shouldn't the First Amendment protect people from situations like this? And that's exactly the controversy here. The First Amendment of our Constitution protects nearly all forms of speech, excluding a direct call to action of violence, inciting a panic, and certain forms of defamation. Now, in Lincoln's statement on Vallandigham's arrest, he made it clear that his arrest was due to the fact that he was laboring with some effect to prevent the raising of troops, to encourage desertions from the army, and to leave the rebellion without an adequate military force to suppress it. None of these things were a direct call for violence. Clement Vallandigham was briefly banished to the CSA by the Union, and then was there for about 24 days until he was able to move to Canada, in which he ran his race for Ohio governor out of a hotel. he lost his race by a landslide. The story of Clement Vallandigham is interesting, because even though Clement was spouting opinions that the majority of people today would find obscene and hateful, such as white supremacy and pro-slavery, he spouted such opinions peacefully, yet was censored by the government anyway. If there is anything to take away from Vallandigham's story, it's that even though someone may spout opinions that you do not agree with, it is important that the government itself allows such speech to be said as long as it isn't a direct call to action of violence, inciting a panic, and/or a form of defamation. This principle is important because odds are that at some point in anyone's life, the head of government is going to be someone who disagrees with you. And when the head of state disagrees with you, both you and the head of state should have the opportunity to state each other's arguments and hopefully come to some sort of reasonable conclusion. For it is only through civil dialogue can we truly make the positive change so many of us want to see in the world.